David Fowley, I found out something incredible earlier this week, or I guess last week. Uh, in preparations for our discussion of Clerks III, you watched Clerks 1 and 2 for the first time. Wow.
This guy right here, first time.
How, as a fellow child of the 80s, adult of the 90s, art school kid, cinema enthusiast, student of the mid 90s and Tarantino and Kevin Smith and Robert Rodriguez, how the hell had you never seen Clerks 1 and 2?
I think
I can understand Clerks 2 maybe, but Clerks
yeah,
1.
I was just gonna say, let's clarify that. And I could have sworn I'd seen Clerks, and I guess I realized last week that I didn't see it all the way through.
Okay.
I've seen clips, okay, but I don't know. It's weird because I think it was one of those things where it became such a huge phenomenon, and that here's this, indie filmmaker who's also a total geek, pop culture geek, loves comic books and all that stuff. And I was like, okay, and I just kept on going, I don't know. It was weird. I mean, what was it, 94? Clerks came out
90. Yeah, sounds about right. Yeah.
93. We should probably know this if we're talking about it, right?
Well, because I know. Well, the thing is, like, Mallrats came out in 95.
94.
So 94. So because that was a big when he hit because, like I said, Mallrats, which was he went from Clerks, this independent thing that he sold his comic books to help make. The next year, he has a mainstream comedy from Universal Pictures out in theaters. So it's amazing.
Right. And I think if you didn't know any better, you would never know that Mallrats had any connection to Clerks. You just wouldn't.
Well, I mean,
so if you'd never seen Clerks and you're watching Mallrats, and let's say that's your gateway Kevin Smith, you're like, oh, okay. Oh, wait, he did something called Clerks last year. I don't know. I think this was a Miramax film, right? And it was just one of those indie films that was just getting a lot of talk about at the time. And yeah, I guess I was starting to get into more independent and foreign films at that point, and I just, for some reason, I mean, honestly, I think my gateway to Kevin Smith was probably when he started writing Daredevil.
Comics.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew about him. I knew, I may have seen, again, some of Mallrats by at this point right now, to this day, I have seen Mallrats all the way through. His stuff's funny, and I think Clerks is probably his best, like, honest film, I think. Where it's really trying to say something, and it's coming from a place of heart, of substantial I guess commentary, but it also feels very autobiographical, which it is, and which Clerks III very much is. Clerks II, yeah, I saw that back to back. I remember when it came out, and all I knew was about, like, donkey sex. It's like, okay, and so I watch it, and I'm like, oh yeah, this is the one, and I'm like, okay, this is no big deal. I don't know what this says about me, but really, it wasn't any big deal. I feel.
Wait, the movie or the donkey sex, or both?
I mean, there wasn't really. It doesn't really show much, But yeah.
Thank goodness.
Yeah, exactly. And I liked the addition of Rosario Dawson. I thought she really adds something fun to the whole world of Clerks. And I like that it goes from Clerks, convenient mark, to Clerks, greasy fast food joint.
Movies, yeah.
Yeah, movies, yeah. And I remember when I started also following him when he had that website, Movie Poop Shoot. I don't know if you ever remember that.
Well, that was,
But
yeah, because that was a fictitious website that came, or that was a website that came out of a fictitious website from Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back in
that's right.
2001.
That's right.
Yeah.
So I do remember going to theater for Jay and Silent Bob Strikes Again, mainly because I was like so curious about all the cameos and stuff. So, and I had seen Dogma. For the most part, I enjoyed it. But yeah, I think having seen like stuff like Red State and Tusk and everything, going back to Clerks for the first time, back to the for the first time, I just have a better appreciation for where he comes from,
Yeah.
and I was really hopeful with him returning to that. With you know, I wish he would have returned to that in Clerks 2 and 3, but it didn't really happen. And I would have liked to have seen him film all of these in black and white again. That would have been cool. Just because it feels like if there's something about black and white and Clerks where it makes you like hone in on the world a little bit more. And it also feels like you're in a job where it feels like time crawls, and so I think it almost, black and white has this kind of timeless, or actually like it's a timeless, but it's also like a certain time period quality to it.
Yeah.
And so it would have been cool if he's going to go out link ladder on us. It would have been cool if he would have done them all in black and white. But enough about me. What's your history with Smith and Clerks?
Well, I mean, I've been a fan of Kevin Smith's. Well, there are distinct phases in Kevin Smith's career, and I could spend 3 hours talking about my experience of Kevin Smith movies. I'll try and boil it down. I discovered him in '94 when Clerks came out, and it immediately registered with me and with my mom. Like, we both rented this movie because we'd heard about it, and it's so like filthy dialogue wise. I mean, it's all dialogue in his movies for the most part. But we were both like, it was on our wavelength, and we became huge Kevin Smith fans. Mallrats even was just a treat for me because it was a continuation of this world.
Right.
Now, if you've never seen Clerks, you can watch Mallrats, but if you have seen Mallrats with Clerks, it's the View Askew universe, right?
Yep.
It's
Yep.
Kevin Smith building an entire, before Marvel, he was crossing characters over and making all these great references, carried on through Chasing Amy and beyond. I think culminating in Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back. It's great to see the evolution of these characters, but I think something happened famously 2 years after Clerks II, which came out in 2006. He made Zack and Miri Make a Porno, which was his attempt to get in on the oh my gosh, I'm totally blanking on his name.
Judd Apatow.
Judd Apatow. It's weird. I had his face in my head and I couldn't remember his name, but it was his attempt to make an Apatow movie. And I love Zack and Miri Make a Porno, but it was a notorious flop. And after that, it's around this time that Kevin Smith, who had built an empire on independent films, kind of these drug comedies, he was a teetotaler essentially. He never did drugs until after that movie. He became a massive pothead and built this kind of second career as a podcaster, and then making like these really strange smaller movies like Tusk, like Red State, none of which
Cop Out.
Well, he directed Cop Out. He didn't write Cop Out. And it's great to hear him talk about that whole thing, especially with
Right.
Bruce Willis. And if you haven't caught up with Kevin Smith, I don't remember what panel he was on, but he was at a convention sometime shortly after Bruce Willis, earlier this year. It came out with his diagnosis about his kind of degenerative cognitive disease. Hearing Kevin Smith talk about what that means to find that out in context of Cop Out, because that was the movie where he, like, Bruce Willis was one of his heroes kind of growing up, right? And then they had such a bad relationship on that movie that to hear Kevin Smith talk about Bruce Willis after that, it's very moving. Smith is a wonderful storyteller. I'll try and dig it up and leave a link in the comments. And I promise, folks, we will get to talking about Clerks 3 because past is prologue. But I thought Clerks 2 is one of my perfect sequels. I love that movie.
Mm.
And it's sort of like Rocky Balboa. It's sort of like Rambo, not the Last Blood nonsense, but the Rambo that came out
Yeah.
around the same time as Clerks II, catching up with characters, more than a decade after we've seen them last, and where are they? And I thought that it was a great balance of humor and heart. I think that, Randal and Dante, the convenience store, the quick stop that they work in, burns down at the beginning of the movie. They end up working at Movies, the fast food restaurant, and it becomes like a new setting for them to rag on customers and try and figure out why their lives are going nowhere. And it ends, spoiler alert for anyone who hasn't seen Clerks II, they end up borrowing a bunch of money from Jay and Silent Bob to reopen the quick stop, to buy it and open their own convenience store and run it. And much like the end of the first Clerks, it ends on a kick-ass Soul Asylum song, and a wonderful closing shot that at first glance it seems almost like the victory shot, like, hey, we're going to pan out, through the convenience store that Randal and Dante now own, instead of just being kind of like slaves to this, horrible nowhere job. But if you look at this graduate style last shot, they don't look happy for the first, few seconds, like, yep, this is our place. And then they're like, but we're still just, it's just a convenience store.
Yeah.
So the idea that Kevin Smith would make Clerks III, especially after his real life events of having a heart attack, a lot of what the Randal character, played by Jeff Anderson, who was a hero of mine going back to 1995. I love the Randal character. He has a heart attack. He survives a widowmaker, which takes out 80% of the people that it affects. And the same thing happened to Kevin Smith a few years ago. There's a Joe Rogan podcast where he talks about that experience, and it's a great story and very moving as well. I dare you not to tear up at it. So Randal decides he's going to make a movie. He's been jerking around this convenience store for 20 years. He always talks about movies. He loves movies, loves ragging on them. But this is a wake-up call to make a film about his life. And that movie ultimately becomes a version of Clerks. Now, that's a great idea for a movie, I think.
Cleverly called Inconvenience.
Inconvenience, right? The problem is, this is the Kevin Smith of after Zach and Miri make a porno. And I kind of didn't really get to this point earlier, but I have not liked any of his output, I don't think, since Zach and Miri make a porno. I didn't like Red State. I didn't like Tusk. I hated Yoga Hosers because
with that.
It's a female version of Clerks, which is fine, except that the problem is I don't exactly know how to diagnose the problem. I don't want to blame the drugs, but it feels like he had far more focus and far more insight into what made his own comedies work before he started getting high than he did afterwards. They're just these really loose movies that don't really have a point to them, and any sense that they do have, or the seeds of the story and potential of great comedy are still there, but they're just not realized. And I feel the same way about Clerks III. I hate Clerks III.
I'm so glad.
But here's the problem. I think there's a great, and I mean a great movie buried in here. And
I agree.
I was mad at myself because at the end of Clerks III, I was crying. Well, I should say during the climax, I was really teared up, but I was also crying out of kind of passion for the Clerks. And that was a little tidbit. Smith's initial concept for the title of Clerks II was the passion of the Clerks.
Hilarious.
In this, but that was because at the time, it was around the same time of the Passion of the Christ. He was talking about doing this, right? Just like Mallrats, the sequel is going to be called Die Hard in a Mall, or Mallrats 2, Die Hard in a Mall. But the problem with Clerks 3 is it becomes very confusing as to whose movie it is. Is it a movie about Dante and Randal from the View Askew universe making Clerks, or is it sort of about the real life story of making Clerks? It gets really confusing when during the audition sequence, they can't find the right actors, local actors, to play themselves. So Dante and Randal end up playing themselves, and they show black and white footage of them sort of made up to look like they did kind of in 1995, but they're very clearly much older. But the final product as we see of Randal's film is just Clerks from 1995, where all the actors look exactly 25 years younger than they are.
Mm-hmm.
I found myself getting confused and frustrated and just wishing that, I hate to use this phrase, Smith had stayed in a lane and made this movie about the making of Clerks without all this other random stuff like Elias, the 19-year-old kid from Clerks II, who's like the Bible thumping, ultra Christian kid who kind of comes out of his skin at the end in the donkey show in crazy ways. He's now 36. He rejects Jesus and becomes a full-on Satanist. And he's got his own Silent Bob hanger-on throughout the film. None of that's funny, except for
None
one
of it.
bit where he there's a bit where he shows up dressed sort of like Tim Curry, a la Rocky Horror Picture Show, mostly in the hair and makeup. And I'm like, it's an interesting idea, and I like what he did with that scene, but everything else, none of it works.
None of it. I couldn't stand the Elias character, and I couldn't believe they brought him back because he was probably the least interesting and the least funny in Clerks 2, but I understood him as a character and a person because he resonated to me more so in Clerks 2 as somebody I would recognize or maybe either relate not relate to, but somebody I would recognize in real life. Like, okay, I knew a kid like that, or yeah, that is somebody that I maybe would have worked with at a fast food joint. I see that. I could see that. But here, it's like everybody. The problem is there's no. I think in these movies, if you're going to show no real growth for Randal and Dante, then you should show some growth for all their other characters, the supporting characters, to kind of re-emphasize the fact that these guys, our main protagonists, haven't really moved forward, in life. It's not that they're, not content in life. It's just that this is where they're at. And 15 years later, 20 years later, this is where they're at still, where everybody else could have. This guy Elias is this character Elias could have been totally happy. Maybe he's leading a local church somewhere. Maybe he's a totally happy and content and cool Christian. But that's not in Smith's wheelhouse because he always has to make fun of, either Catholicism or religion or some type of, organized religion or something. That's just who he is. That's just how he sees it.
Well, but here's the thing. It hasn't been this one note before, really. I mean, because if you look at him, have you seen Dogma?
Yeah, I don't remember it, but I did see it. Yeah, it's interesting.
Right. I mean, Dogma had a lot to say about
Yeah.
religion and ideas and how mankind kind of interprets things that we can't really grasp. Like we've got half the story, right?
Yeah.
But at the same time, you've got the idea of the buddy Christ, the kind of the hey Jesus statue, which we see on a kite in this movie. You can kind of understand that it's like, all right, maybe the Catholic Church is, they're trying to reform their image by making it hip and cool, but it's also like kind of grossly commercial and strange.
Right.
I don't have that much of a problem with it because he was also saying some pretty serious things in Dogma. But in this movie, yeah, Elias is, he's been a Christian for 35 years.
Mm-hmm.
And at the drop of a hat, he decides to not only reject God, but become a full-on Satanist, which, again, not to get into the full nuances, but Satanist does not necessarily mean devil worshiper.
Right.
It's essentially the absence of religion, but he's like, bowing down before, demons and shit. It's just, it's an odd take. It doesn't seem honest. It seems like a throwaway thing. Whereas Smith, in his previous life, again, before Zach and Miri make a porno, or up to that point, he had wacky, raunchy comedy, but he also had insight into what I'll call the human condition.
Mm-hmm. I agree. Yeah, I just feel like, one note is a good descriptor for it. Yeah, I just feel like that it was annoying that the whole every time he appeared, and every time he appears, he's in a different costume. It's like, what is this, the Oscars? It's like, come on. I don't understand. Was the Buddy Christ thing introduced in Jay and Silent Bob Strike Back? Is that when it was
No,
introduced?
it was introduced in Dogma.
In Dogma. That's right. That's right. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. I get
And
it. I
it's
get it
been
all
kind of
confused.
yeah, it pops up, throughout his movies. It's kind of a running gag. But the other thing is the screenplay that Randal writes about his
Mm.
life. He allegedly writes it in a night, haha, but it's 160 pages long, and it encompasses Clerks and Clerks II because the movie stuff is in there. And we're meant to believe that they are going to try and film both of these to make one long Clerks saga as the first movie. Now you can do that. It's odd, but also when you are writing a film that encompasses 20 years of these guys working at a convenience store, that's not what Clerks was, and it's not why it resonated. If Clerks in 1995 had been about two almost 50-year-old guys working in a convenience store, it wouldn't have worked. The whole point is it's a couple of Gen X kids, just starting out after college, or they didn't really go to college. And it's like, this is what they're kind of stuck doing until they, shit or get off the pot, to use the, Randall's expression towards
Right.
Dante. In this movie, it's like, okay, what is this Clerks movie supposed to be? At the end, we see that it's just Clerks, but again, it doesn't make any sense because from a meta context, yeah, it's Smith celebrating the work that put him on the map. But if you look at the context of the movie, it's like, no, if I'm watching this and these 50-year-old guys are making this movie, it's not going to look like it's 25-year-old guys making a movie.
Yeah, totally. I mean, and it's not just it's that, but it's also if you know while you're watching this that Smith, also suffered from the aforementioned Widowmaker himself. I mean, it's just all of a sudden becomes this big aha. Okay, all right, I get it. I understand. He wanted to. This is like catharsis for him, and I'm sure he was thinking, "There's no way I'd make another Clerks movie." He has his heart attack, survives his heart attack, changed his lifestyle forever, everything. And then he was like, "Well, what if this happened to one of my characters, or actually both?"
We'll get to that.
Yeah, we'll get to that. Yeah. Um, and that is interesting. Okay, it's like you're putting a little bit of yourself in this sequel, which is what he did in the first movie. He's putting himself. This is his Clerks from '94 was basically his recollection of working in this little convenience store. You wanted to start out in a video store, and the owner of the video store and the convenience store said, "Yeah, actually, we need more help in the convenience store, so we need you over there." And he was like, "Oh, geez." And all he wanted to do is be left alone and watch TV, but all these customers got in the way. And that's a great story, and it winds up being a great movie. I guess what I like about Clerks II, I'm not as hot on it as you are, but what I like about Clerks II is that, all right, we're doing that, but there's still Clerks, but in a different setting. And here, sure, we're going back to where it all began, and I just don't feel like there's enough of an emphasis on, but where are these people now?
Well, and that's the opening. There's something that happened to Kevin Smith somewhere along the way. And this is a guy, again, like another 3-hour show we could do about how he used to be this kind of like small, convenience store guy who made it big, making an independent film. But even as he got bigger and bigger, he still felt like a geek, right?
Mhm.
He would still rail on corporations that made terrible decisions and put out terrible movies and all this other stuff. Listen to, if you can get a hold of the commentary for Mallrats, it's wonderful because it's like him and a young Ben Affleck and all these people from like 1995 talking about that and also pop culture. It's uncensored, it's unfiltered. There's something
Hilarious.
there's something about Kevin Smith now that is very corporate and very safe and not at all edgy.
Mm.
I kind of like wandered off whatever point I was going to make there.
Well, you were talking about there's something that happened to him along the way, and
Oh,
yeah.
right. Okay. So, but what I was going to say, the opening of this movie is like the opening of Alien 3. At the end of Clerks 2, you've got Rosario Dawson's, she is, the star of that movie.
Really
because
is.
I watched Clerks 2 the night before I watched Clerks 3 because I wanted to refresh my. I've seen the first Clerks like, dozens of times in the last, almost 30 years. So I love it. But I'm not as familiar with Clerks 2. I watched it. I was charmed all over again. I laughed a whole bunch of places. I had the warm fuzzies at the
Hmm.
end with the Soul Asylum, track Misery
Yeah.
closing out the film. Uh, and at the end of that movie, Dante does shit or get off the pot. It means leaving his fiance,
Yep.
that he's going to move to Florida and run some car washes. She got a wealthy family. She's kind of the attractive, popular girl who meets the schlub who's the kind of the safe guy. And Becky, played by Rosario Dawson, is the manager at movies that Dante has had like kind of a one night stand with, but they're also crushing on each other, but it's a forbidden love because Dante's engaged.
Right, right, right.
At the end of Clerks 2, he decides he's going to be with Becky, partially because that one night stand led to a baby that is now on the way. So at the end of Clerks 2, Becky is very pregnant and they've all teamed up together to open this convenience store and they're kind of happily ever after. So in Clerks 3, I was thinking, okay, this is 15 years later. I want to see,
Where's the kid?
Is Dante Jr. now, is he working in the convenience store? Is like Randal giving him crap or whatever? When we open up on Clerks 3 with the, repeated montage of Dante coming and opening up the store and all that
Fixing the
stuff,
coffee and all that. Yeah.
right? We see on the cash register, I think it is, an old piece of paper that's Becky Scott Hicks, 1973 to 2006 or whatever it is.
79. I watched it again. It was 79.
79, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Becky's dead,
Huh?
and so is the girl, the young daughter that she dies, and they don't really get to the point because right after we see that, they start in with the funny clerk shtick, and I'm like, no,
Huh?
no, no, you need to pull the movie over and explain that to me.
Yeah.
And when I say the Alien 3 thing, it's like it opens up, and all of a sudden, all the people you care about from the first movie, aside from Sigourney Weaver, are just killed in a ship accident. Like, wait a second,
You're right.
I want to follow what's going on with these characters, and you're just telling me they're dead. That's
And
it.
it
And I
and it
gotta pay attention another 2 hours.
and granted, dear, viewer, Rosario Dawson is in this movie. I just do not like the way she is in it at all.
I hate it.
I
I hate it.
I like her in it. I just don't like the way she's in it at all. And there is a very interesting scene here. There's so many moments in here that just like you said could have been a better movie. Dante calls 911 when Randal has a heart attack in the convenience store, and he goes to the emergency room with him. And while he's in the hallway, he kind of flashes back to a moment he remembers. Maybe the last time he was in the emergency room was when Becky was on a stretcher. Pregnant Becky was on a stretcher. I think the idea is that they got in a car accident, or she got in a car accident.
She got, yeah, and that's one of the annoying things is
Yeah.
because when we see that, it's just she's being rushed in on a stretcher. She's still pregnant, or she's got the belly, and then you see Dante kind of running in afterwards, right?
Yeah.
So we don't know what happens. You kind of get the feeling that there's nothing. I'd have to go back and watch the scene again, but there's nothing that said to me, "Oh my God, something's really wrong." I got the feeling that she was going into labor. She was about, maybe she had an oxygen mask. I don't know, but it didn't say car accident to me. Later on, we find out that she, I guess, had been driving and was hit by a drunk driver that killed her and the baby.
Right.
And so I'm guessing what we see is a Dante's memory of maybe he got called to the hospital
Right.
just as they were wheeling her into the OR or whatever. But it felt like that's the kind of information, like if you're going to tell me Becky's dead, don't be coy about it. Don't show me one flashback and like, okay, then we're going to have a whole bunch of comedy and shticky stuff and Satanist garbage. And then like 40 minutes later, we'll tell you, oh, it was a drunk driver. There's a scene where Dante goes to Becky's grave and she shows up and she talks about all the people she's fucked in the afterlife. And
It's
she goes
terrible.
on and on and on. And it's just like this terrible comedy. And she brings up the stuff that I had hoped that they had moved past from Clerks II, which is the whole shtick of like, oh, I don't believe in romantic love. Because at the end of that movie, when Dante proposes, she leaps through the drive-through window and she's like, I thought you didn't believe in romantic love. And she, says, well, I do now or whatever.
Yeah.
But in this graveyard scene, he's like, I knew you never believed in romantic love. And she's like, I never did. I'm like, that's garbage.
Yeah.
We've overcome that whole
Hmm.
thing. Having a child together, beginning to start a life together, that's, they're all in each other. So why bring this stuff up again? It's pointless. And then she tells Dante, she like gives him advice on starting his, going back to live his own life. Don't be, don't end up dead. You're still alive. It's kind of like the climax of Up. When
Hmm.
was it Carl Fredrickson or whatever he sees the message from his dead wife.
Right.
It's a great moment that you could have cut out the entire middle of that scene. You start where Dante goes to the grave and he sees Becky and she's like, what's wrong? You cut all that other stuff about heaven out and then just go back to, look, I'm dead, you're not, go on. And it would have been a beautiful scene. Instead,
Hmm.
it's just kind of ugly and tragic.
Yeah, I mean, it totally negates where we left off with Clerks II, unfortunately. And she does, I forget where, but she does show up a couple other places.
The movie theater at the end, which I thought that's what got me. I was
Yeah,
frustrated because I'm like, this movie has not earned this moment at all, but I
yeah.
love the idea behind it of,
Hmm.
so we'll jump ahead here. And again, I'm sorry if you're listening to this and you haven't seen Clerks III and you intended to, I'll put a spoiler tag on this episode. But Dante has a heart attack as he's exploding at Randal for probably the 90th time in
Hmm.
their lives. Uh, and he falls down, goes to the hospital. It's much more serious because he's hooked up to tubes and stuff. Randal goes home, finishes editing his version of Clerks, brings it to the hospital, and he's showing it to Dante. And then Dante is like semi-conscious and kind of wakes up in a movie theater and he's watching the original Clerks, which is Randall's movie. And then Becky is next to him in the theater and they're watching it. He's all overwhelmed with the emotion of, seeing his life story kind of reflected back at him and what it means that Randall had made this as a tribute to him. And Becky's like, we can go now. And instead of what I was expecting of Dante saying, I got to go back to my friend or whatever, he's like,
Hmm.
he just goes with her. And I thought that was a really unexpected and kind of beautiful moment. And I like that Randall, when he's realizes that Dante back in the real world is dying, this it's a level of emotion that we see from Jeff Anderson and frankly Brian O'Halloran that we haven't gotten in any of the Clerks movies. Genuine outpouring of crying emotion, like it's Oscar bait type stuff, but it's really terrific. But it's in service of a script that just spent 90 minutes telling me that these aren't the characters that I thought they were.
Yeah, I mean, I've never really thought that they were like great actors, but here I agree. I mean, they do show, especially in those in the third act here, they definitely show some great range. But yeah, it's at the service of a screenplay that just is really, to me, heavy-handed, and it kind of cheats what could be for these characters, unfortunately. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I feel like, when you describe that just now, that scene in the hospital, it's almost like Smith is writing that, like, what would have happened. I could totally see Kevin Smith in the Dante character, lying on a hospital bed, maybe drifting off, and then thinking about, like, maybe sitting in a movie house, a movie theater, and watching the first Clerks and thinking, look how far you've come. Look, we could look back on this with great, sweet nostalgia and wonderful moments. Maybe your life wasn't all that bad, kind of thing. But yeah, it's weird to say that a Clerks movie is kind of tonally jarring, but I because it's kind of always how it's they're always just like, comically jarring. But for this one, it is kind of totally jarring because you have just such great, you have the material has such great potential to be resonating with people that are the same age as these characters, who grew up with these characters, and think like, yeah, we have lived long enough where we've probably had some health scares, or we've had people who've passed or died, and how do we live with that? How do we move on with that? And it's hard. But this movie never really touches on that much, not that much, not to the point where it could.
Well, it's frustrating too, because especially watching Clerks 2 again, there's a scene in the car where I think it's when Dante and Randall are driving to do the go-karts, and Randall finally kind of comes clean with Dante about like why he's being such a prick, like even more so lately, because it's Dante's last day. He's going to move to Florida, tomorrow or whatever. And Randall is talking about, what am I going to be without you? I've got no friends. I've got no legacy. Essentially, I don't know if he used the word legacy, but he's essentially saying he's not done anything significant with his life. So that's a perfect kind of seed planted for a Clerks 3 where he makes this movie. I would love to have this thing get out of the convenience store. Like Randall makes the movie and we follow his version of the Kevin Smith journey to like maybe it becomes a festival darling.
Yeah.
Maybe you break out of the convenience store and actually go different places and perhaps show what that does to his relationship with Dante if Randall goes off and becomes famous and Dante's still at the store or whatever, because we do get a little bit of that in that big fight scene of, Randall not appreciating what everybody else who's come together to make his movie has done for him. He's like, I'm the writer, I'm the director, I'm starring it and all this other stuff. But you got all these other people like lighting and editing and, well, not editing, but yeah, getting money and all this other stuff. Again, some wonderful ideas completely wasted in this non-picture.
Yeah. Like Dante, he asked Dante to be the producer, right? And producer, he was like, just secure a bunch of money. And it's like Dante's like, well, I don't want to do this. What? Come on, man. And then when he reads when he reads Randall's script and sees how he's been incorporated into the script, it's just like, what do you do? And so that's like, it just seems, and of course that's why he does, the main reason why he does the rewrite to, write in more of their, meaningful friendship and everything. But, that's why you don't write it the first. That's why you don't go with the first screenplay that you wrote in one night. But yeah, I just feel like there could be a whole lot more here. And I thought it was hilarious how everybody was talking about how, oh, this is Sarah Michelle Gellar's big comeback in movies and stuff and whatever. I'm like, what? I barely recognized her and knew she was there. She's just like one of many other actors like Fred Armisen and
Freddie Prinze Jr. or husband.
Freddie Prinze Jr.
I think one of those was Melissa Benoit from Supergirl.
Oh yeah, I think you're right. But they're all auditioning for characters at like a local theater in the movie for the Randall's movie. And yeah, sure, that stuff's kind of funny, and there's they all do the classic line, like, I wasn't even supposed to be here today, or something like that. Funny, and we do get Ben Affleck coming back and doing a strong accent. But again, it just kind of, especially knowing what that, specifically Dante has gone through, it just seems like, why are we moving on with all this stuff when I'd rather get to the heart of like how he's coping or not coping with losing the love of his life,
Well, and that's an entirely different kind of movie. And what these tones that keep butting up against each other when they go to movies to film the donkey show portion, which they need to essentially, I can't remember how they got in, but like they distracted the movie's employees by getting them all high. So then they would sneak in, the camera crew would sneak in through the front or the back, or whatever. But Dante goes with them, and it's like he didn't realize what they were doing because he gets to the parking lot and he's like, I can't go back in there because they used to work together. He's like, I haven't been to movies since that happened. And Brian O'Halloran has this mental breakdown as Dante. That's some powerful stuff. But it's like a minute before that, we'd had this music montage of these people, like one's in the movie's costume played by Kate Micucci, all these people getting high and dancing and stuff. And it's meant to be funny. But then you have this dramatic scene that just comes off as horrible overacting because it's bookended by ridiculous nonsense. I know it's not horrible overacting, but it just comes off that way. Like, oh, just stop. No, this is not that movie.
Yeah, and this is, I don't know if the other ones were, but this is edited by Smith too.
Yes.
So maybe it's all about where things are placed, right? In editing. So yeah, I don't know. Maybe having somebody else either edit or help him out. I don't know what the
I
answer is here.
I think someone needed to. It's sort of the George Lucas problem, which again, I feel like Kevin Smith of 20 years ago, this movie would not have flown. I think
No.
someone need to come in and read it and say, look, Kev, this is a love letter to yourself, which is, understandable but kind of weird, but maybe just, tuck this in over here and expand on this, or maybe make this a short film and then you make the real movie into this, because it's just all sort of all over the place. But, you could have had, dare I say, a dramatic Clerks, like a dramedy that actually works. The other thing, like, okay, in Clerks II, Jay and Silent Bob, they got on the wagon. They were clean and sober,
No.
and they're back to smoking like room-sized blunts, and they've opened up instead of RST video, it's RST THC. And like, that's great.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
there's a whole gag at the beginning about how drugs are legal now, but they still sell them as if they're illegal. And like,
This
it's
is how we
something
did
that
it in the
works.
90s.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
something that I think works on paper, but when you're watching it, it goes on for like a minute and a half, this gag. I'm like, yeah, I get it. Can we move on, please?
Yeah. And it blows my mind that I forget what other movie he did this with. It might have, I know it was Red State, but he's doing this whole like event screening like in different cities.
Yep.
And it just blows my mind that like this is the movie that he's doing event screenings for. And what, I don't know, something like the cheapest tickets, like $50, or it goes up to
50
150
bucks.
or whatever. And I'm like, come on, man. I'm like,
I Well, I saw on Twitter today, because there was a recent one, maybe like last night or sometime over the weekend, and uh, people were like, "Oh, this is the best Clerks yet," and
who's saying that?
Kevin Smith like won the audience. I think part of it is they show the movie. Kevin Smith's going to be there. It's in a really great venue, and he comes out and like does a Q&A, which probably means he's going to tell great stories for an
Yeah.
hour and a half to 3 hours, which I think it'd be kind of worth the price of admission, maybe. But I just don't like, there's a music box here in Chicago event, I think November 7th, and I don't know if it's sold out or if there's still tickets available. I considered going,
Hmm.
but it's $50
Yeah.
plus fees and everything. I'm like, especially after seeing Clerks 3 now, no, I would feel pissed off if I paid to see this. I would almost go just to hear the audience reaction, to see if there are people who genuinely are on this wavelength, or if it's kind of like the sycophantic laughter because
Right.
Smith's
Right.
gonna
Right.
be there. But I know this episode is going up the day before. There's a string of Fathom event screenings at different. This is not the road show. It's just rather regular Fathom events
Right.
all over
Right.
the country. You can go for like the next 5 days, and I think they even added some theaters or screenings because of demand. But I'm sorry, folks, to tell you, speaking from a lifelong, almost lifelong Kevin Smith fan, I almost guarantee you're going to be disappointed.
Yeah. I don't see how you wouldn't be you know disappointed. It doesn't make sense. I mean, um it doesn't have a freshness as Clerks 2 did, and it doesn't have the the energy and fun as the Clerks 2. um yeah, so it's just it's really almost forgettable movie, sadly. And yeah, I agree. I mean, if it was if they were showing the original Clerks and Smith and Jason Mewes was going to be there or something, maybe that would be cool. But
Oh, yeah, I would go see Clerks 1 and Clerks 2 and a handful of other movies if he was going to be there, and just to hear him speak.
yeah.
Like I said, he's a great raconteur, but this is just, it's a dud. And the one kind of cool thing, the one actual bit of Kevin Smith that I saw in this movie was over the second half of the end credits, because they play this
Mm-hmm.
song at the end. It's not a solo Silent song, unfortunately, but
Bummer.
after that song goes out, if you stick around, you'll hear him talk about the end scene of the film, and how during that like pan out where you see Randal, he's alone, but kind of the ghost of Dante is with him. I mean, come on, Kevin, at least give Dante, ghost Dante, a force glow, right?
Something. Come on.
Yeah, because all they do is talk about Star Wars in these movies. But anyway, he said that there were going to be title cards, kind of explaining that Randall's movie became somewhat of a success, not the same success that Kevin Smith enjoyed, because he implied that he went on to make a bunch of kind of indie movies while still working at the convenience store and developed a bit of a following. It's almost like Harvey Pekar in American Splendor, the comics from like the 70s. But he cut it out. And then he talks about the line, this job would be great if it weren't for the fucking customers. And he kind of goes into the evolution of that line from Clerks I into Clerks III, and how he feels that his job, Kevin Smith, as a filmmaker, is great because of the customers, because of the people who have been loyal to him and his movies and followed his journey. He really gives humble thanks. I was more moved by that, bit of a weird audio commentary over the end credits than by anything in the previous hour and 40 plus minutes.
Yeah, I mean, it definitely makes me, if I had to watch this again, I would watch the whole thing with Kevin Smith commentary if he does one. That would be interesting. Yeah, I mean, he does good commentary, and I enjoyed hearing him at the end and the end credits, and it was almost like I wanted him to say, hey, guys, thanks for sitting through this. I know it was kind of self-indulgent jerk off, so look, I survived a heart attack. What are you going to do? I had to put it out there. I would appreciate that. Or even if that was the intro, or something. I don't know, man. It just doesn't seem like, anything different or new. And that's what kind of, but at the same time, like, and I'm talking like from a filmmaking approach. I don't expect Dante and Randal to be in a different or new place. I don't want them to be. I want them to be stuck in time in a way. Of course, Clerks II, I was so happy for him to get love, find love, and all that. But still, he could still do that while being content in a convenience store. I always, think that it's not necessarily, you can take a miserable job and you can handle wherever you're working, dependent on how you mentally approach it. It's like, your job doesn't have to define you. So yeah, I wish there was something more to this. Unfortunately, it's all up there. It's all up there on the screen, and it's just kind of messy. The inclusion, once again, we bring back Dante's ex. Basically, yeah, that's Kevin Smith's wife, right? Yeah.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
Jennifer.
Jennifer.
Smollett,
Yeah. And in this one, he includes his daughter, Harley Quinn, who he's professed is the best actor that he knows. Okay, every dad's gonna say that, dude.
Look, watching this movie made me feel really old because, I'm around the same, you and I are both around the same age as these guys.
Yeah.
But no, I met Kevin Smith at Comic-Con in like 2000, I want to say. And I actually, when he was on his way to the signing table, I ended up kind of, and this is at San Diego, so it was like pure kismet that I find myself next to him on this floor at all. But it was great because his wife was there with baby Harley Smith in a stroller. And they was like, awesome. Yeah, they were like, yeah, I'll see you later. I got to go to this thing, and went to the table. And then, of course, I waited in line for like 2 hours to finally see him.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just the passage of time, because now Harley is like in her 20s and she's like in a band and like acting in the movies and stuff. It's nuts.
She was in Yoga Hosers, right?
Yeah, and she was also in Clerks II. She was a little girl in the restaurant who waved to Dante in the car.
Right.
Yeah.
I remember meeting him probably when he was on, I wouldn't say on tour, but showing up at conventions for Daredevil, and it was actually him and Jason Mewes together. So it wasn't just for Daredevil. Obviously, it was for the popularity of the Jay and Silent Bob characters. I totally respect him as a filmmaker, and I appreciate his career and what he's done. Also, him being a really good voice for geek culture. Um, I just wish this was a better movie. Um, I'm always curious to see what he does. I've heard rumblings of a Tusk sequel, and I'm like, no, please stop.
Yeah, I don't think those rumblings, sir. I think that's on the plate.
Yikes.
Yeah. So yeah, I don't respect him as much anymore as a geek icon, mostly because, like I said, I think since the heart attack and he lost a whole bunch of weight, great for him, he's healthy, but something switched in him. Now he's all over social media, like crying. He gets all this access to like movies and stuff, and he's going to the Star Wars sets and crying like, this is the most amazing Star Wars I've ever experienced. Like he's talking about like the rise of Skywalker. I'm like,
Stop
no,
that.
again, Kevin Smith from 1995 would have beaten the crap verbally, at least, out of Kevin Smith 2022, and it's just so sad.
Okay, that being said, if I was on the set of Rise of Skywalker, I would also be saying this is the most amazing. And then once I saw the movie, I'd be like, all right, when you're on the set of a movie, it's amazing. When you see the final product of a movie, not so amazing.
But the problem is he doesn't take that step. When
Yeah.
when the movie came out, he was like, "Oh, this
Yeah.
is great, it's fantastic, man," and like that,
Yeah.
But that
Mm.
again, that's just my gripe as someone who wants to recapture that magic. But maybe the whole point of Clerks III is that you can never go home again, unless
Good
that
place
home
to
is
end.
or yeah. So I hope there's not a Clerks IV.
Who would it
Is there
be
going to be a
for?
Clerks? Not for me, certainly, but who knows? Yeah, Clerks Clerks meets Bubba Hotep. They're all in an old folks' home and they're like fighting demons or
Well,
something.
there's
It's like
only one left, so yeah.
there's Ghost Dante. I'm
That's
telling
true.
you,
Ghost Dante
Force
and
Ghost
Ghost
Dante.
Becky getting it on in heaven. Wow.
Well, and that's another icky part because and I thought about this like throughout the entire movie because they go so far as to name their daughter. I assume they named her, they picked out a name before, she was born because she was obviously not born, but they named her Grace.
Mm.
When Becky is talking about all the guys she's had sex with in heaven, I'm like, there's no mention of like, oh, and yeah, Grace was up there and we're hanging out and all this other stuff. Like,
Yeah.
it just
Yeah.
seemed very callous,
Icky.
and it seemed uncharacteristic of the Smith, who again had a lot of brains and heart and, dare I say, soul previous to this other point in his life. I don't see him as being this crass or neglectful of a detail that's, for me as a fan of these characters from the previous movie, it just seems so callous.
Yep. I agree, man. I agree.
All right, I'm done ranting. Thanks to David Fowley of keeping it real. Again, I give you the full introduction at the end. Hopefully everyone's stuck with us. But yeah, Clerks III, not a recommend, except if you're very curious and you want to see an absolute train wreck. It's going to be playing at some Fathom events and various road shows around the country. If you see Clerks III and you feel differently about it, or if you agree, let us know down in the comments. We're very curious. And what's your favorite Kevin Smith movie? What's your least favorite? Mine might be Clerks III. No, it's still Yoga Hosers. But anyhow, thanks, sir. I'll catch you later. We'll talk about something else coming up. And yeah, Snoochie Boochies, I guess.